My brother didn't just lock me in the attic to steal my inheritance. He kept my mother's second husband drugged in a secret basement room for 30 years just to cash his pension checks. I realized the truth when I found the life insurance policy and heard a body being dragged across the floorboards. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to the day the locks changed. My brother told me the attic was full of trash. By midnight, I realized the only thing he wanted to throw away was me. It is 2 a.m. in Lowell. The air in this house smells like damp wool and rot. I am sitting among stacks of my mother's life. My lungs feel heavy with 60 years of dust. Paper doesn't lie, people do. Precisely 3 hours ago, Soren handed me a heavy-duty garbage bag. He patted my shoulder with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Alina stood beside him in her crisp blue scrubs. She handed me a small plastic cup of white pills. She called them my evening vitamins for my memory. I swallowed them because I wanted to trust her. They pointed me toward the narrow stairs of the attic. Soren said the legal work downstairs was too boring for me. He said I should focus on the sentimental items upstairs. I climbed the creaky wooden steps into the heat. The attic was a furnace of forgotten things. I saw my mother's old sewing machine in the corner. It was covered in a thick layer of gray grime. I found a box of old tax returns from 1994. Everything was labeled in her perfect looping cursive script. My head started to feel light and disconnected. I sat down on a moth-eaten velvet trunk to steady myself. Alina had left her iPhone resting on the lid. She must have forgotten it when she brought up the water. The screen suddenly lit up with a new notification. It was a text message from my brother Soren. It said, "Keep her upstairs until the appraiser leaves." My heart gave a sickening thud against my ribs. An appraiser was coming to the house tonight. Soren told me the house wasn't being sold yet. He said we were just cleaning for the estate tax. It's in the fine print, he always says. But he was lying about the appraiser being here. I looked at the dusty floorboards beneath my feet. I remembered something from the summer of 2023. I saw my mother sitting right where I am now. Her hands were trembling as she fumbled with her shoe. She was sliding a small silver key into her insert. She looked at me with a terrifying, sharp clarity. She told me the floor spoke more than the walls. My head throbbed as the memory faded into the heat. I stood up and walked toward the attic door. I needed to ask Soren about the man downstairs. I reached for the brass handle and turned it. It didn't move an inch. I pulled harder until my fingernails scraped the wood. A heavy metallic click echoed from the other side. My own brother had just turned the deadbolt from the hallway. I am locked in, and I can hear a stranger's voice downstairs. My brother told me the attic was full of worthless junk. 3 hours later, I realized he was actually hiding a crime scene. I am standing in the rafters of our family home in Lowell. The air is thick with the smell of mothballs and rotting newsprint. It is nearly 2 a.m. Dust motes dance in the beam of my flashlight. I am 67 years old, and my knees ache from the floorboards. Soren gave me a trash bag and a pair of gloves. He said he was handling the important legal papers downstairs. Precisely. That was his word for the inheritance we are supposed to share. My niece Alina stayed up here with me for a while. She is a nurse practitioner with very cold hands. She kept insisting I take my supplements for my memory. I swallowed the chalky white pill just to make her go away. Then she left her phone on a dusty steamer trunk. She said she was going downstairs to get us some water. The screen lit up with a new text message. It was from Soren. The message said, "Keep her upstairs until the appraiser leaves." My heart gave a heavy, dull thud against my ribs. The appraiser isn't here for the house. We already had the house valued last month. I felt a sharp chill crawl up my spine. I looked at the old trunk where the phone sat. I remembered something from last year. It was 2023. My mother was sitting in her armchair by the window. Her hands were trembling as she reached for her shoe. She slid a small silver key into the Dr. Scholl's insert. She looked at me with terror in her eyes. "Don't let them take it," she whispered. I didn't understand what she meant back then. Now, the silence downstairs is far too heavy. I heard a vehicle pull into the gravel driveway. It is a black sedan with tinted windows. I moved toward the attic door to see who it was. My fingers brushed the cold brass of the handle. I turned it, but the metal didn't move. I pulled harder, nothing. Then I heard the distinct mechanical click of the deadbolt. Someone had locked it from the hallway. My own brother had just trapped me in the dark. I hammered my fist against the wood. "Soren!" I yelled. My voice sounded thin and raspy in the insulation. No one answered. I am locked in. I am trapped with the dust and the secrets. The supplements Lena gave me are making my head spin. Paper doesn't lie, but my family certainly does. I reached for the door handle again. It didn't budge. My own brother had just turned the deadbolt from the hallway. The heavy brass handle didn't budge. I pulled again, but the deadbolt held firm. My own brother had locked me in the attic. The air in here smells like cedar and ancient rotting paper. It's thick enough to swallow your breath. My head began to swim. That white pill Alina gave me was starting to take hold. It felt like my brain was wrapped in wet cotton. I sank onto a stack of old trunks. Downstairs, a man's voice drifted up through the floorboards. It was deep and unfamiliar. The mahogany pieces are in excellent condition, he said. Soren's muffled laugh followed. He sounded like a man who had already cashed the check. I gripped the edge of a dusty sewing machine to steady myself. My fingers left tracks in the gray grime. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I am 67 years old. I am not a child to be put in a timeout. Paper doesn't lie, people do, and Soren is a very loud liar. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I needed to move before the medicine turned my legs to jelly. I stood up and kicked a pile of 1980s National Geographics. They slid across the floor, revealing a patch of stained rug. Mother always talked about the foundation of this house. Keturah watched the floorboards, she used to whisper. I thought she was just losing her mind. Precisely the opposite was true. I dropped to my knees and tore at the edge of the moth-eaten rug. The fibers scratched my palms. Underneath, the wood looked different. One board was slightly shorter than the rest. I pried it up with a heavy, flathead screwdriver I found in a junk box. It popped with a sharp, dry crack. Tucked inside a yellowed magazine was a small, folded slip of paper. I smoothed it out on the dusty floor. It was a receipt from a security company in Boston. The total was $3,400. The item was a high-end floor safe. I checked the date at the top, October 14th. That was exactly 2 weeks before Mother passed away. My eyes drifted to the name on the credit card line. It wasn't Mother's signature, it was Soren's. He was using her money to buy a vault while she was still breathing. My skin went cold. The room felt like it was shrinking around me. I took the receipt into my pocket. My thumb brushed against the paper edge. It felt sharp. I looked back at the hole in the floor. The receipt wasn't for the safe I was looking for. It was for the one they thought they'd already emptied. The heavy thud of that deadbolt echoed through my teeth. I am not a woman who forgets the sound of a locking door. My brother Soren thinks I am losing my mind. He thinks the pills Alina feeds me are working. My head felt like it was stuffed with wet wool. A dull throbbing pressure started right behind my left eye. I reached out to steady myself against the rough attic wall. The wood was cold and smelled of damp insulation. Downstairs, I heard the front door open and close. A car engine idled in the driveway of our Lowell home. It was that black sedan with the midnight-tinted windows. I crawled away from the door on my hands and knees. The floorboards groaned under my weight like tired bones. I needed to find a way out or a way in. My eyes landed on a stack of old National Geographics. They were piled high in the corner near the chimney. My mother always said the foundation was the only thing that mattered. Precisely. She wasn't talking about the cement in the basement. I began tossing the yellow-bordered magazines across the dusty floor. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flickering flashlight. My lungs burned with every shallow, panicked breath I took. Under the stack, the floral rug was eaten away by moths. I ripped the tattered fabric back with my bare hands. My fingernail caught on a splinter and started to bleed. I didn't care about the sting or the bright red drop. I knocked my knuckles against the wide oak floorboards. One of them sounded hollow, like an empty wooden casket. I pried at the edge of the board with a flathead screwdriver. It popped loose with a sharp, protesting crack of old wood. Beneath it sat a nest of insulation and yellowed papers. I reached into the dark gap and pulled out a magazine. It was the December 1984 issue, thick and heavy in my hands. A white slip of paper fell from between the glossy pages. I snapped it up before the draft could blow it away. It was a receipt from a security company in Boston. The total at the bottom was $4,800. It was for a high-end, fireproof floor safe with a digital keypad. The date on the thermal paper was October 14th. That was exactly 2 weeks before our mother passed away. I looked closer at the name on the credit card line. It wasn't my mother's elegant, shaky script on that signature. It was Soren's bold, arrogant print across the bottom. He had used her private accounts while she lay dying upstairs. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. He wasn't just managing the estate for our benefit. He was liquidating her life before her body was even cold. I looked back down into the hole in the floor. My flashlight beam hit something metallic and matte black. It wasn't a safe, but it was a heavy steel box. This house is full of secrets buried in the fine print. Paper doesn't lie, but my brother certainly does. He thinks he locked me up here to keep me quiet. He doesn't realize he locked me in with the evidence. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. The receipt wasn't for the safe I was looking for. It was for the one they thought they'd already emptied. The weight of that security receipt in my pocket felt like a lead sinker. I knelt back down by the jagged hole in the attic floorboards. My head was spinning from whatever Alina had forced down my throat. The air in this crawl space smelled like ancient dust and rotted pine. I gripped the heavy flathead screwdriver until my knuckles turned white. I shoved the metal tip into the gap and leaned my entire weight forward. The wood groaned and splintered with a sickening crack. Beneath the floor sat a gray steel-plated beast. It was a floor safe, bolted directly into the 19th century joists. It looked brand new, mocking the layers of filth surrounding it. There was no keyhole and no spinning combination dial. A small glass rectangle glowed with a faint pulsing blue light. It was a biometric thumbprint scanner. I stared at it while my heart hammered against my ribs. Soren didn't just want me here to sort through old quilts. He couldn't open this without me. Suddenly, a vibration buzzed through the floorboards right under my knees. I reached into the dark gap and pulled out a slim smartphone. The scream lit up the dusty corners of the attic. It was Alina's phone, likely dropped while she was helping me earlier. The call log was open, displaying a wall of missed calls. 15 missed calls from a contact saved as the crematorium. Every single one of those calls was timestamped from yesterday. My mother hadn't even been gone for 48 hours yet. Why was a nurse practitioner ducking calls from a funeral home? I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My vision blurred for a second, the light from the screen searing my eyes. I remembered something Grandma told me back in the summer of 2015. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset over the Merrimack River. She held my hand and looked at our matching silhouettes against the light. She whispered, "You have my hands, Keturah?" Exactly. At the time, I thought it was just a sweet, sentimental observation. Now, looking at that glowing blue scanner, it felt like a prophecy. Paper doesn't lie, but my own family certainly did. I hovered my right thumb over the cold glass sensor. My hand was shaking so hard I had to steady it with my left. I pressed down, and the blue light turned a steady, mocking green. A heavy mechanical thud echoed through the silent attic floor. The steel lid popped open just a fraction of an inch. I pulled it back, expecting gold coins or stacks of cash. Instead, I saw a thick stack of leather-bound folders. I grabbed the one on top and flipped it open. My mother's face stared back at me from a crisp passport page, but the name printed next to her photo wasn't hers. It said Evelyn Thorne, and the issue date was only 3 years ago. I reached for the next one in the pile. Different name, different country, but always the same hunting eyes. The safe didn't just contain money, it contained a stack of passports, all with my mother's face, but different names. The matte black steel box felt like a block of ice against my palms. I dragged it from the cavity in the floorboards. My head was spinning. From that chalky pill Alina forced down my throat, my vision blurred. As I stared at the lid, there was no keyhole on this cold piece of metal. A small glass square sat embedded in the center of the lid. It was a biometric scanner, a thumbprint lock, precisely the kind of high-end security Soren would use for his real estate deals. Then I heard a muffled vibration from beneath my feet. It was coming from the floor below. I pressed my ear to the dusty attic planks. Alina's phone was buzzing. On the nightstand in the guest room, I could hear the rhythmic hum of the vibration through the wood. It stopped and then started again immediately. This person was desperate to get through. I crawled toward the vent. To catch the sound better, the vibration stopped and a voice drifted up. It was Alina. She sounded frantic. "I told you we're handling the body," she whispered. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mother has been dead for weeks. Why was she talking about a body? In the present tense, I looked back at the black box. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the flashlight. I remembered something from years ago. We were sitting on the porch. In the humid July heat, Grandma held my hand up against the golden sunset. "You have my hands, Keturah," she whispered. "Exactly my hands." She wasn't talking about beauty or grace. She was talking about the ridges and the whorls. She was talking about the hardware. I reached out and pressed my right thumb to the glass square. The scanner glowed a faint ghostly blue. A mechanical click echoed through the silent attic. The lid popped open just a fraction of an inch. My breath hitched in my throat. I pulled the heavy lid back. The smell of old paper and ozone filled my lungs. I didn't see gold bars or stacks of $100 bills. I saw a row of leather-bound folders. I grabbed the one on top. It was a passport. I opened it to the photo page. It was my mother's face staring back at me. But the name wasn't hers. It said Elaine Vance. I grabbed the second passport. Same face. Same shark jawline. This one said Mina Sokolov. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. There were 5 of them. 5 different identities for one woman. My mother wasn't just a school teacher. She was a ghost with a paper trail. I heard heavy footsteps. On the stairs, the deadbolt on the attic door groaned. Soren was coming. I scrambled to shove the passports back into the box. My fingers brushed a stack of envelopes at the bottom. They were all postmarked from Switzerland. I didn't have time to read them. I slammed the lid shut. I shoved the box back into the hole. I kicked the floral rug over the loose boards. The door handle turned with a sharp metallic snap. I sat on the floor and pretended to sort through old National Geographics. My mind was screaming. The safe didn't just contain money. It contained a stack of passports, all with my mother's face, but different names. The heavy brass bolt on the attic door slid back with a sickening grind. I shoved the leather folders and Alina's phone deep into the crawl space hole. I kicked the loose floorboard back into place just as the door creaked open. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. Alina stood there silhouetted against the dim hallway light. She was holding a single glass of water and a small plastic cup. Her nurse practitioner's scrubs rustled as she stepped over the threshold. She looked at me with that practiced clinical pity she uses for the dying. It was 2:42 a.m. I know because the glowing numbers on her wristwatch felt like twin lasers. She said, "Auntie, you're still up and pacing." I didn't answer. I just watched her eyes. They darted toward the rug I had just straightened over the safe, precisely 3 inches to the left of where it usually sits. Paper doesn't lie, but people certainly do. She handed me the water. It was lukewarm and tasted faintly of the copper pipes in this old house. She held out the small white pill. "It's just your vitamin, Coutura," she whispered. I looked at the tablet. It had a tiny embossed R on one side. My memory might be fraying, but I know my supplements. There is no R on a standard B12 complex. I felt a cold sweat break out across my collarbone. I placed the pill in my mouth and tucked it under my tongue. I took a long swallow of the water to sell the performance. Alina stepped closer and wrapped her arms around me in a tight, suffocating hug. She smelled like antiseptic and expensive floral perfume. As she squeezed, I felt something stiff in her side pocket. I reached down with 2 fingers while her chin was on my shoulder. I snagged a folded piece of paper and tucked it into my waistband. She pulled back and smoothed my hair. "There now," she said. "Go back to sleep." She turned and locked the door behind her again. I waited until her footsteps faded down the stairs. I spat the pill into my palm. It was already starting to dissolve, leaving a bitter, chalky film. I pulled the paper out of my waistband and unfolded it. It was a clinical printout. The header read, "Rapid Onset Memory Loss Induction." I felt my stomach drop into the floor. Beneath the title was a photo of the exact pill in my hand. The text described a regimen designed to create manageable confusion in elderly patients. My niece wasn't treating my memory, she was erasing it. I leaned against the cold plaster wall to keep from fainting. I looked at the pill in my hand. It wasn't a vitamin, it was a weapon. The heavy deadbolt on the attic door slid back with a metallic screech. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't look up from the dusty stack of National Geographics. I kept my hands busy with the yellow-bordered magazines. Soren stood in the doorway for a long beat. His shadow stretched long and thin across the floral rug. He didn't say a word at first, he just watched me. I could feel his eyes scanning the floorboards near my knees. Precisely where the matte black box was hidden beneath the wood, my skin crawled with the sensation of being hunted. "Still at it, Coutura?" he finally asked. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were hard as flint. I forced a confused smile onto my face. I gripped a magazine from 1984 until my knuckles turned white. "The archives don't organize themselves, Soren," I whispered. He stepped further into the room. The floorboards groaned under his designer loafers. Then I heard the soft click of heels on the stairs. Alina appeared behind him holding a tall glass of water. She was wearing her nurse's scrubs. The light caught the stethoscope around her neck. She held a small white pill in her palm. "Time for your vitamin, Auntie," she said. Her voice was sweet, but her grip on the glass was firm. She walked over and knelt beside me on the attic floor. The smell of clinical soap and lavender drifted off her. I looked at the pill. It was small and round. I noticed the tiny embossed letter R on the side. My mother's vitamin bottles never had pills like that. "I already took one this morning," I lied. Alina didn't blink. She just held the glass closer to my lips. "You're getting confused again, dear," she said. That word felt like a slap in the face. I am a retired archivist. I do not get confused. Paper doesn't lie, but my niece certainly does. I took the pill and tucked it under my tongue. I made a show of swallowing the lukewarm water. Alina leaned in to give me a lingering hug. Her lab coat wrestled against my shoulder. I felt something stiff in her side pocket. My fingers moved with the precision of 40 years in the stacks. I slipped the folded paper out of her pocket. I hid it inside the magazine I was holding. She pulled away and patted my cheek. "Rest now," she whispered. She and Soren walked to the door. I heard them whispering in the hallway. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. "Is she out yet?" Soren hissed. "We need that thumbprint before the lawyer gets here." I moved back to the center of the room. I spat the white pill into my trembling palm. I opened the magazine to see the stolen paper. It was a medical printout about something called rapid onset memory loss induction. The description of the drug matched the R on my pill. My breath hitched in my throat. My own family was erasing my mind. I looked at the pill in my hand. It wasn't a vitamin, it was a weapon. The floorboards in this attic don't just hold dust. They hold 30 years of calculated silence. I am sitting in the dark with my back against the cedar chest. My heart is a frantic bird hitting the walls of my chest. I can hear Soren and Alina whispering in the hallway downstairs. Their voices are low, rhythmic, and deadly. I have the white pill tucked into my pocket. I have the medical printout crumpled in my left hand. They think I am drifting into a chemical fog. They are waiting for the lawyer to pull into the driveway. Precisely at 3 a.m., the world is supposed to end for me. I crawled back to the floral rug near the north eave. My knees scraped against the rough wood. I pulled the rug back to reveal the matte black steel box. My thumb hovered over the glowing red scanner. It beeped once, a sharp sound in the quiet house. The lid clicked open with a heavy metallic groan. I shoved the passports aside this time. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the flashlight. I reached deeper into the velvet-lined bottom. There was a false floor inside the box itself. I pried it up with my fingernails. A single sheet of cream-colored paper sat there. It was a marriage certificate from Las Vegas. The date was August 12th, 1994. My mother, Cheneriose, had married a man. His name was Arthur Beaumont. I felt the air leave my lungs. We were told Mom spent that entire summer in Maine. I looked at the bottom of the document. The witnesses were listed in clear, bold ink. Soren O.C., his wife was the second witness. My own brother stood in a chapel and watched her marry. He never breathed a word to me. He never mentioned Arthur Beaumont once. I remember the dinner table in 1995. Mom was crying into her tea in the kitchen. She told us she missed her friend Arthur. Soren laughed until he turned red in the face. He told the neighbors she was losing her mind. He said she was delusional about having a boyfriend. I believed him because he was the stable one. I watched him gaslight a grieving woman for decades. Beneath the certificate was a blue folder. It was a life insurance policy from a Swiss firm. The payout was for $2 million. The primary beneficiary was Arthur Beaumont. The contingent beneficiary was my brother, Soren. My skin went ice cold in the humid attic. This wasn't just about the house or the silver. This was about a fortune built on a disappearance. I smelled the old mothballs in the trunk nearby. The scent made my stomach turn over. Paper doesn't lie, but my brother is an artist. He didn't just hide a secret marriage. He erased a human being from our history. I looked at the gold seal on the paper. It felt heavy, like a tombstone in my lap. Soren is standing outside my door right now. He thinks I am a confused old woman. He thinks I have forgotten who I am. But the archivist in me is finally awake. I folded the certificate and hid it in my waistband. I can hear the gravel crunching outside. A car is coming up the long driveway. The lawyer is here for a signature. But Soren doesn't realize I know about Arthur. Soren didn't just hide the marriage. He made sure Arthur Beaumont disappeared from the records. The heavy oak door to the attic groaned as Soren stepped inside. I felt the marriage certificate bite into my skin. It was tucked tight against my ribs. I slumped against a stack of moldy boxes. I made my eyes look glazed and unfocused. Precisely the way a drugged old woman should look. Soren didn't even look me in the eye. He just grabbed my upper arm with his cold fingers. His grip was like a vice. "The lawyer is here, Katura," he hissed. My heart was thumping against that stolen paper. I let my head loll to the side. I needed him to think the pill was working. He dragged me toward the stairs. My feet felt heavy, scuffing against the dusty floorboards. The air in the hallway smelled like lemon polish and lies. As we reached the landing, the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, aggressive sound that cut through the silence. It wasn't the polite chime of a family lawyer. I saw the flash of blue and red lights through the sidelight window. My breath hitched in my throat. Soren froze, his hand tightening until it bruised my skin. He pulled me into the small office and shoved an old iPad into my lap. "Stay here and don't make a sound," he whispered. He didn't realize the iPad was already logged into the house accounts. I waited until I heard his footsteps hit the porch. My fingers were trembling as I swiped the screen. I opened the Ring camera app. The screen flickered to life in the dark room. I saw a man standing on our front porch. He wasn't carrying a briefcase. He was wearing a dark windbreaker with Paulus written across the back. The screen showed his badge clearly. Detective Miller, Lowell PD. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. Soren was standing in the doorway, blocking the detective's view of the hall. He looked sweaty. His shirt was stuck to his back. I leaned closer to the cracked iPad screen. I heard the detective's voice through the tiny speaker. "I'm here about a missing persons report," the man said. "Arthur Beaumont." It's been 30 years, but a lead came in. My blood turned to ice. Arthur, the man on my mother's marriage certificate, the man Soren helped erase. I had to get to that door. I stood up, but my legs were like jelly from the actual physical stress. I stumbled toward the window overlooking the porch. I tried to heave the sash upward. It wouldn't budge. The frame was caked with layers of white lead paint. I grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk. I slammed it against the pane. The glass didn't break. It was old, thick, and reinforced. I dropped to my knees and began pounding on the floorboards. I screamed for the detective to look up. My voice came out as a thin, ragged rasp. It wasn't loud enough. It couldn't pierce the floor and the heavy front door. I crawled back to the iPad on the floor. I watched the detective check his notepad. It was disappointed. Soren was shaking his head, pointing away from the house. He was telling the law that nobody lived here but us. He was telling him I was confused. I watched the detective turn his back. He was leaving. He was walking down the gravel path toward his cruiser. My last hope was literally walking away. Then Soren turned around. He didn't go back inside. He looked directly into the camera lens. He stared straight at me through the screen. He knew I was watching. A slow, jagged smile spread across his face. He knew I had the iPad. He knew I was trapped. Soren's boots creaked on the attic stairs. It was a slow, rhythmic sound. He didn't rush. He knew I had nowhere to go. I looked at the iPad screen one last time. The blue light from the police cruiser was fading into the October mist. They were leaving. My only chance for help is driving down the gravel driveway. I shoved the iPad under a stack of old quilts. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I could feel the sharp corner of the marriage certificate pressing against my hip. It was tucked tight into my waistband. Soren appeared in the doorway. He wasn't red-faced or shouting. He looked calm. Too calm. He held a manila folder in his left hand. Precisely 5 minutes had passed since he saw me on that camera. He walked toward the center of the room. The smell of damp wood and old paper filled the air. He didn't mention the iPad. He didn't mention the police. He just looked at me with a pained, practiced expression. He said, "Katura, you look exhausted." I didn't answer. I just watched his hands. He set the folder down on a dusty trunk. Next to it sat a glass of water and a fresh white pill. The R was staring right at me. Alina must have left it there while I was distracted. Soren opened the folder. He pulled out a document with a heavy blue backing. It looked official. It looked like a death warrant. He told me it was our grandmother's final will. He said they found it in a safe deposit box yesterday. I leaned forward to look at the signature. The ink looked dark and rich. It was almost too perfect. I leaned closer. I could smell the fresh toner. The paper felt warm, like it had just come out of a laser printer. I touched the bottom corner. My finger came away with a tiny smudge of black. The ink was still tacky. It wasn't 30 years old, it was 30 minutes old. The document stripped me of everything. It claimed I had diminished mental capacity. It left the entire real estate empire to Soren and Alina. My brother sighed. He looked like he was the one suffering. He said, "The lawyer is downstairs, Katura." He told me I just needed to sign a clarification. It was a simple paper. It would confirm I agreed with grandmother's wishes. He handed me a heavy gold fountain pen. The metal felt cold and heavy. I looked at the R-pill on the nightstand. Then I looked at Soren's smiling, empty eyes. He thought the drugs had already turned my brain to mush. He thought I couldn't see the lie right in front of me. Paper doesn't lie, but my brother certainly does. I felt a sudden, sharp coldness wash over me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was liquid nitrogen. I looked down at the signature line. It was blank, waiting for me to sign away my life. I knew the lawyer wouldn't help me. He was likely on the payroll too. Soren leaned in close. I could hear his shallow breathing. He whispered, "To sign it and you can finally rest." I gripped the pen until my knuckles turned white. I picked up the pen, but I wasn't going to sign. I was going to draw a map for whoever found my body. The gold fountain pen felt like a weapon in my hand. I didn't sign the document. Instead, I pressed the nib into the paper. I began to draw a jagged line across the forged signature. Soren leaned in closer. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He didn't see the marriage certificate hidden in my waistband. He just watched the ink bleed into the fibers. "What are you doing, Katura?" he asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. I told him I was mapping out the truth. He snatched the paper away with a sneer. He told me I was far too tired. He said the lawyer would wait downstairs. Then he turned and locked the door behind him. I heard his heavy footsteps fade down the hallway. I was alone in the attic again. The silence was heavier than the dust. I looked at the matte black steel box. I had to know what was inside. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. It glowed a faint, ghostly green. The lid clicked open with a metallic snap. Inside was a layer of old Swiss envelopes. I moved them aside with trembling fingers. My hand hit a false bottom in the box. I pried the thin metal plate upward. There was a small digital recorder hidden there. It was wrapped in a piece of yellowed stationery. I recognized the shaky handwriting immediately. It was a note from my mother. "Katura, don't trust the water," it read. My throat went dry at the sight. Paper doesn't lie, but people certainly do. I picked up the small black device. My thumb hovered over the play button. The timestamp on the screen said October 14th. That was the night my mother died. I pressed play and held it to my ear. The recording started with a wet, ragged cough. Then I heard her voice. It was a thin, terrifying whisper. "They think I'm asleep," she breathed, "but I'm just paralyzed." My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt like the floor was falling away. She sounded so small and so brave. "The vitamins make my legs like lead," she said. I thought of the R-pill on my nightstand. I thought of Alina's practiced, professional smile. I remember my mother's funeral last year. Alina cried the loudest of everyone there. She held a silk handkerchief to her eyes, but I saw her eyes through the lace. They were perfectly, chillingly dry. My mother's voice continued on the tape. She said the room was getting darker. She said Soren was looking for a key. I gripped the recorder until my knuckles turned white. My eyes stung with a sudden hot grief. "I hid the box in the floor," she whispered. She knew they were coming for her legacy. She knew they were erasing her life. The smell of mothballs in the attic felt like a shroud. I was sitting on the floral rug, shivering. "They are standing at the door now," she said. Then the recording changed. There was the sound of a door creaking open. I held my breath in the dark attic. A second voice entered the room. It was sharp and clinically cold. It was Alina's voice. She said, "It's time for your rest, Grandma." Then I heard the sound of a liquid being poured. The recording didn't stop there. I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. The recording ended with a wet, heavy thud. It was the sound of something large hitting the floorboards downstairs. My breath hitched in the back of my throat. The attic air felt like tomb dust in my lungs. Precisely 4 minutes had passed since I triggered the playback. I looked down at the digital recorder in my palm. My thumb was shaking so hard the plastic casing rattled. I wasn't just hearing a death anymore. I was hearing a cleaning service for a murder. I crawled across the floor toward the old chimney stack. The bricks were cold and gritty against my fingertips. I reached for the house iPad I'd hidden behind a stack of loose insulation. My skin crawled as the screen illuminated my face in the dark. I didn't check the Ring doorbell this time. I went deeper into the stored files. There was a folder labeled Backups from 3 years ago. I swiped through the grainy thumbnails of the outdoor security feed. One video caught my eye from a rainy night in November. It showed the driveway leading to the basement bulkhead. Soren was there, drenched and straining under a massive weight. He was dragging a rolled-up Persian rug toward the cellar door. The rug was heavy and lumpy in the middle. As he dragged it over the gravel, a dark trail followed behind. It wasn't water from the rain, it was a thick, viscous fluid that looked black under the floodlights. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. Arthur Beaumont didn't just leave our mother and disappear. He never left this property at all. He was in that rug. I sat back on my heels, staring at the frozen image of my brother. The basement was directly beneath me, 3 floors down. I could hear them arguing now through the floor vents. Their voices were muffled, but the venom was clear. Alina shouted something about the stench in the crawl space. Soren yelled back that the lime didn't work as well as promised. I pressed my ear to the cold metal of the vent. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. They weren't talking about my mother. She had been buried in a proper casket. They were talking about the ghost in the foundation. They were talking about Arthur. I realized then why the attic was so important. It wasn't about the silver or the Swiss bank accounts. It was a vantage point. They kept me up here to keep me above the evidence. But the vitamins were supposed to make me forget the layout. They wanted me to lose the map of my own home. I looked at the gold fountain pen still gripped in my left hand. I hadn't just effaced a document downstairs. I had declared war without even knowing the stakes. Then I heard the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. Not the attic stairs, but the ones leading from the basement. The cellar door creaked open with a high, piercing whine. A heavy silence followed, thick as the smell of mothballs. I realized the terrifying truth of my situation. They weren't waiting for me to sign that forged will. They were just waiting for the sedative to finally kick in. Once I was unconscious, they wouldn't need a signature. They just needed another rug. The heavy thud of boots on the stairs is a sound I will never forget. It was 4:05 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Precisely. I stood in the center of the dark attic with the iPad gripped in my trembling hands. This screen showed the hallway camera. Soren and Alina were moving upward together. They weren't whispering anymore. They were coming for me. I looked at the floral rug by the window. I thought about Arthur Beaumont. I thought about how he was currently rotting under the floorboards in the crawl space. I realized then that I was meant to be the next rug. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I had to bring the world to this house. I had to force the neighbors to look at this rotting mausoleum. My eyes fell on the stack of December 1984 National Geographics. Paper doesn't lie, people do, and paper burns. I lunged for the small brass lighter in the 70s smoking kit on the vanity. My fingers fumbled with the cold metal. I grabbed a handful of yellowed pages from the magazine. The smell of old ink and dust filled my nose. I struck the lighter. The flame flickered, then caught the edge of a map of Switzerland. I dropped the burning paper onto the center of the floorboards. I piled more magazines on top. My hands were shaking, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. The fire began to grow, licking at the dry wood. A thick gray smoke started to curl toward the ceiling. I stepped back, my eyes stinging. I felt the marriage certificate tucked into my waistband. It felt like a shield against my skin. I held the digital recorder in my left hand. The smoke detector on the ceiling began to chirp. Then it erupted into a high-pitched, piercing shriek. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I looked back at the iPad screen. The kitchen camera showed Soren and Alina freezing in place. Their faces were washed out in the blue light of the security feed. Soren reached into a wooden block and pulled out a long kitchen knife. Alina was shouting something I couldn't hear over the alarm. They weren't running for the exit. They were running toward the stairs. I was standing in a circle of growing heat. The air was getting thin and hot. I could feel the sweat slicking my forehead. My lungs burned with every breath. I watched the smoke rise, a gray pillar of defiance. I knew the neighbors on Miller Street would see the light in the windows. I knew the fire department was only 3 blocks away. I just had to survive the next 5 minutes. The heat from the magazines was intense now. I stood my ground, holding the evidence tight. The heavy deadbolt on the attic door rattled. The wood groaned under the weight of a shoulder. They were trying to break it down. I smelled the mothballs in the old trunks catching fire. The smell of the past was burning away. I felt a strange sense of peace. I was no longer a confused old woman in a dusty room. I was a witness. The doorframe splintered with a sickening crack. A piece of wood flew across the room. The door burst open. It wasn't the fire department. It was Soren. And the look in his eyes wasn't fear of fire. It was the urge to finish the job. Soren lunged at me with that kitchen knife. The blade caught the orange glow of the growing fire. I didn't scream. I didn't have the breath left for it. My fingers were locked around the heavy steel safe door. It was cold and jagged where I had forced it free. He was 3 feet away when I swung it. I aimed low, putting every ounce of my rage into the movement. The metal edge slammed into his shins with a sickening crack. Soren buckled. He didn't just fall. He tumbled backward toward the landing where he'd left his tools. That's when I heard the mechanical groan. He had hauled an industrial-sized shredder up to the hallway. It was a massive gray beast meant for destroying decades of evidence. The intake was wide and hungry. Soren's designer blazer caught in the spinning steel teeth. The machine didn't care about the price tag. It started pulling him in by the shoulder. I saw his eyes go wide with a primal, pathetic kind of fear. He dropped the knife. It clattered onto the hardwood floor near my feet. The smell of burning insulation was sticking my throat now. I scrambled past him as he fought with the sleeve of his jacket. A piece of paper fluttered out of his breast pocket. It drifted through the air like a dying bird. It landed right in a patch of crawling flames on the rug. For 1 second, the text was clear. It was a DNA test result from a lab in Boston. It proved it. Soren isn't even Grandma's biological son. He's been a fraud from the very first day. The fire licked the edges of the paper. It turned the ink to ash before I could reach it. Soren's screams were drowned out by the shredder's mechanical roar. The smoke was a wall of gray and black now. My eyes were stinging. I could feel the heat on my face like a physical slap. I reached for the heavy attic door. I didn't hesitate. I slammed it shut and threw the bolt. I locked him in with the fire and his secrets, precisely where he deserves to be. My chest was heaving. I could feel my own heartbeat in my fingertips. I turned and leaned my back against the splintered wood. The hallway was full of shadows and flickering light. The smell of mothballs was replaced by the stench of burning plastic. I didn't run for the front door. I didn't look for the neighbors. My legs were shaking, but they knew where to go. I had the iPad gripped in my left hand. I had the gold fountain pen in my right. The marriage certificate was still tucked into my waistband. It felt like a block of ice against my skin. I needed one more thing. I needed to see the floorboards in the basement. I had to know if Arthur was really there. I didn't run for the stairs. I ran for the basement. I had to see if Arthur was still there. I reached the bottom of the basement stairs as the first window upstairs shattered from the heat. The smell of burning pine and old insulation choked the air. I didn't head for the shelter. I headed for the back wall behind the heavy boiler. My lungs burned with every breath of gray smoke. I felt the rough stone of the foundation under my fingernails. Precisely 3 feet from the corner, I found the seam in the wood paneling. It didn't look like a door. It looked like a mistake. I pulled at the edge of the plywood. My muscles screamed, but the panel groaned and finally gave way. Behind it wasn't a crawl space of dirt and lime. It was a room, a clean, white, windowless room that smelled of bleach and copper. I stepped inside, my boots clicking on cheap linoleum. A single fluorescent bulb hummed overhead, flickering against the sterile walls. There was a narrow hospital bed in the center of the small space. A man lay there, his skin the color of parched parchment. He was so thin his bones seemed to be trying to escape his skin. I saw the clipboard hanging from the foot of the metal bed frame. I grabbed it. My hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled like dry leaves. It was a patient chart for Arthur B. The entries were all in Alina's neat, professional cursive. Every morning and every night, he received a dose of the white pill, the one with the R embossed on the side. It wasn't a vitamin. It was a chemical cage. The note said it was for sustained compliance and memory suppression. They hadn't just erased him from the records. They had entombed him in the house. I looked back at the man on the bed. His eyes were open, staring at the humming light bulb. I reached out and took his hand. It felt like holding a bundle of dry sticks. His palm had the same unique curve as my mother's hand. I realized then that Soren didn't kill him for the insurance payout. He kept him alive to keep the Swiss accounts active. Every month, the pension and the dividends hit the bank. Every month, Soren and Alina skimmed the life out of this man. Suddenly, the house groaned above us. A heavy crash echoed through the floorboards. Red light flickered in the gap of the false wall. The fire was eating the kitchen now. I heard the distant, high-pitched wail of a siren. The fire department was turning onto Miller Street. I leaned down close to Arthur's ear. I told him he wasn't alone anymore. His fingers gave a tiny, microscopic twitch against mine. Blue and red lights began to dance against the basement's small, high windows. I heard the front door being kicked in with a massive thud. Heavy boots stomped across the porch. I stayed on the floor, shielding Arthur's frail body with my own. The smoke was getting thicker, curling under the door like a living thing. I watched the flashlights of the firemen cut through the haze. They dragged us out into the cold October night. The grass was wet with dew and felt like needles against my skin. I saw the police cruisers blocking the driveway. Alina was already there, standing near the hydrangea bushes. Her designer blazer was torn at the shoulder. A tall officer was clicking steel handcuffs onto her wrists. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like a trapped animal. I looked up at the attic window, where the orange flames were licking the sky. The firemen were screaming for someone to clear the landing. They broke through the attic door with an axe. A minute later, a radio crackled on the shoulder of the medic beside me. The voice said the attic was empty. There was no sign of Soren. The industrial shredder was melted into a heap of plastic. But my brother was gone. I looked at the black woods behind our fence. He knew every inch of those trees. Paper doesn't lie, people do. And Soren is still out there? The sun is hitting the floor of my new kitchen. It is a sharp, clean light that smells like lemon wax and safety. Precisely 4 weeks have passed since the fire. I am sitting at a small glass table in a rental on the south side of Lowell. My hands are not shaking anymore. I hold my ceramic mug and the porcelain is steady against my teeth. The doctors at the clinic stopped the vitamins immediately. My head feels like a room where the curtains have finally been pulled back. Arthur is in a specialized care facility 3 miles away. I visited him yesterday. He sat in a motorized wheelchair by a large bay window. He didn't say much, but he reached out and squeezed my hand when I showed him the marriage certificate. That piece of paper is tucked into a plastic sleeve in my desk now. Paper doesn't lie. People do. The police found Alina 3 towns over in a Motel 6. She had a suitcase full of shredded documents and a bottle of those arm-embossed pills. She's currently awaiting trial in a cinder-block cell, but Soren is a different story. The fire marshal sifted through every inch of that scorched attic. They found the melted shredder. They found the heavy gold fountain pen. They did not find a body, not a single bone. It was 2014 a.m. when I finally looked at my new phone tonight. A notification was glowing on the screen. A Venmo deposit for 1 cent from an account labeled SOV. My heart didn't just skip, it stopped. I tapped the screen with a thumb that still feels the phantom ghost of a biometric scanner. The memo line was short. The attic wasn't the only place I hid a safe. I stood up and walked to my front door. I checked the deadbolt once. I checked the chain twice. Then I checked the floor strike plate. My breath was coming in short, hot bursts. I looked out the peephole at the empty, carpeted hallway. Precisely nothing was there. But Soren is out there. He's a shadow moving through the black woods of my peripheral vision. He knows I have the insurance policy and the truth about his birth. I am not clearing out family attics anymore. I am building a bunker. I am recording this because the fine print of my life is written in blood. If you have been following this nightmare, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if this story hit you as hard as it hit me. Turn on your notifications and hit that bell so you don't miss the update when the police call. Drop a comment below. I read every single one because I need to know I am not alone in this. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it there? I need to know there is a world outside this door that still makes sense.